As he drove his black Toyota Camry through the deserted streets of downtown Baltimore, Marcus Chen massaged his sleepy eyes. The digital clock that was displayed on his dashboard said that it was 11:45 p.m., local time. In addition, the temperature reading made him thankful for the heating system in his vehicle. It was a chilly 20 degrees Fahrenheit, -6 degrees Celsius snow that was beginning to fall gently, adding to his tiredness after the 5-hour meeting of the city council to discuss the budget. The financial Marcus, the chairman of the committee, had spent the whole evening debating over the distribution of finances among the different departments of the city, including the police force. The meeting had been especially contentious when it came to discussing the police department's budget. The proposal for greater financing for military-grade equipment was met with significant opposition from Marcus, who suggested that the money would be better spent on community programming and officer training. The streets were silent, with only the police and the police officers present. Marcus was looking forward to going home to his wife Sarah, who had undoubtedly put his supper in the microwave, as she usually did when he worked late. His house was just 15 minutes away, and he could easily get there. He was looking forward to the odd automobile passing down the street, already seeing himself settling into his cozy recliner with a warm dish of food. Marcus was startled out of his thoughts by the flash of red and blue lights in his rearview mirror. He checked his speedometer and saw that he was traveling precisely at the speed limit. He signaled and pulled over to the side of the road, making careful to stop beneath a streetlight for visibility. His father, who had been a police officer himself, had taught him how to do this. He was perplexed about the speed restriction, but he remained cool. All the appropriate protocols for traffic stops, 2 cops approached his vehicle, 1 on each side. Their spotlights shone straight into his windows, making it impossible for Marcus to see their faces. The officer who was on the other side of the vehicle was the one who approached him. The officer asked the driver's license and registration without greeting his nameplate read Brady, even though Marcus was already rolling it down. The driver's side rapped forcefully on his window with his knuckles, even though Marcus was already sliding it down, a tone that Marcus had heard far too many times in his 15 years of service with the Public Service Authority, combined with an inappropriate amount of aggressiveness. "Good evening, officer," Marcus replied, gently reaching slowly for his wallet. "May I inquire as to the reason for my detention?" Officer Brady's colleague, whose nameplate is Reed Thompson, adjusted his posture and moved his hand to rest on his holster. "Your right taillight is out," Brady stated, even though Marcus knew this wasn't true, since he had just had his vehicle serviced the week before. Marcus was aware of this subtle but apparent intimidation strategy, and it didn't go unnoticed by him. Marcus calmly said, "I had my car checked out last week and all of the lights were working perfectly." The temperature seemed to drop even further as officer, "I apologize, but I feel there must be some error." As Sir Marcus stepped out of the van, he felt his pulse rate accelerate, but he kept his voice calm. "Officer, it is frigid outdoors, and I don't see any signs of a threat." Brady's demeanor altered, and he straightened up and pushed his chest out in a show of power. "The reason I told you to step out of the truck was because Brady's voice resounded through the still night. A few lights came on in surrounding buildings, and inquisitive inhabitants peered through their windows to see what was happening below. Marcus was aware of what was happening, right, but he was also aware of the reality of the situation. As a member of the city council, he had been exposed to a great number of complaints regarding police misconduct. However, experiencing it firsthand was an entirely different experience. He proceeded to unbuckle his seatbelt without hesitation. After fastening his seatbelt and opening his door, he was instantly struck by the harsh cold. His suit jacket provided him with little protection from the chilling wind, and snowflakes started to settle on his shoulders. His leather jacket was also quite chilly. As Marcus's shoes crunched against the little coating of snow that had collected on the street, Officer Thompson commanded a torch beam to follow Marcus's every step. Marcus's hands were visible to us. Marcus lifted his hand slightly, preserving his dignity in spite of the embarrassing circumstance. He noted that both cops had their body cameras switched off, which was a flagrant breach of department regulation. The realization sent a shudder down his spine. His spine, which had nothing to do with the temperature. What occurred next would affect not only Marcus's life, but also the future of the entire police department. But at that very moment, standing in the freezing cold with two aggressive individuals, Marcus was unable to avoid being attacked. Officer Marcus Chen was just another person who was confronted with the harsh reality of authority that was unrestrained, or so the officers believed. The member of the city council took a long intake of the icy air, his mind already racing with ideas about the situation. Tomorrow's implications, but first he would have to endure tonight's confrontation with his dignity and potentially his safety intact. Officer Brady surrounded Marcus like a shark, his boots crunching as he did so. In the new snow, the streetlight produced long shadows on the ground, and the few people who were watching from their windows had now brought out their phones to photograph the sight from above. When you believe you know more than a police officer Brady, you are mistaken. He was shorter than Marcus, but held himself with the confidence of someone who was accustomed to being in charge. Marcus remained absolutely still in his fine suit. Inquired his breath-producing clouds in the chilly air you want to dispute over your taillight. He was shorter than Marcus. While he was gathering snowflakes, the wind had risen up, making the temperature of 20 degrees seem much worse. His fingers were beginning to go numb, but he kept them visible as directed, knowing that any mistake might make the situation even more dire. No, Sir Marcus. Even though his teeth were beginning to rattle, Officer Thompson the younger spoke calmly. I simply wanted to point out that there might be a misunderstanding as corporate training in dealing with difficult situations was proving to be useful. While scanning the inside of the vehicle through the windows, one of the two kept his torch focused on Marcus. He said, "Hey Brady, this guy has some fancy stuff in here. Custom leather seats, a high-end laptop in the back." "Oh, really?" Brady's tone shifted. He halted in front of Marcus, purposefully breaching his personal space, and the officer's face was so near that Marcus could smell the coffee on his shirt. He said, "You're one of those rich guys who think they're above the law." Marcus was able to smell the coffee on his shirt. The snow was coming more heavily now, and Marcus's dress shoes were entirely unfit for the cold. His feet felt like they were about to fall out of their shoes. A passing automobile slowed down to observe, but it immediately sped away as Brady looked in their direction. Blockades of ice. "I tell you, Officer Brady, that I have total regard for the law," Marcus remarked, retaining his cool. He pondered, revealing his identification from the city council. Brady answered with a sneer, "Since you are so respectful, drop and give it to me." Brady then remarked, "But I decided to wait because I wanted to experience exactly what ordinary citizens faced in these situations. Me 20 push-ups right now, and right now." Marcus stared in amazement. "Pardon me, you heard me," Brady remarked, his palm resting comfortably on his taser 20 push-ups. "You should take this as a lesson in humility, unless you would rather we search your car for anything unlawful." Officer Thompson laughed and pulled out his personal phone to film the threat, which was obvious. Complete the push-ups or risk even more severe repercussions. Marcus gazed at the wet and icy pavement, then at the cop badges, trying to remember their numbers. Marcus stated in a hushed voice, "The ground is frozen." When Brady came further closer, he said, "Oh, now you're an expert on police procedures too. Make it 30 push-ups in a minute." "This is not even close to being conventional practice for a traffic stop. Every time you complain, I will add 10 more." Marcus could see the exhaust from his vehicle producing warm clouds in the chilly air, which served as a reminder of the comfort he had been in only a few minutes earlier. More lights had turned on in the buildings that were in the surrounding area. As Marcus went down on the ground, the cops were either uninformed or uncaring about the fact that their phones were filming from windows above them so that they could chronicle the whole thing. He laid his hands on the wet ground, the cold stinging into his palms like needles, and his wedding band clinked against the frozen concrete surface. The ground, the icy pavement, instantly soaked through his suit trousers at the knees. He placed his hands on the wet ground. "Them out loud," Brady instructed, obviously enjoying his power trip, "and make sure that they are performing proper push-ups without taking any shortcuts here." Marcus started the push-ups with his voice remaining steady despite the humiliation. 1, 2, 3, Officer Thompson went past him because his costly suit, which had wowed the city council only a few hours before, was becoming damaged. His tie would plow through the slush every time his chest sank towards the icy ground. Capturing everything on his phone while adding his own commentary, he stated to the camera, chuckling, "This is what happens when people don't respect authority." What neither officer observed was Marcus's wallet slowly slipping out of his pocket, but he continued to record everything on his phone. If he continued to do push-ups, his breast pocket would eventually come up, displaying his identification card from the city council. This would completely alter the dynamic of this chilly winter night, but for the time being, it would remain closed. Marcus continued to count his arms, which were shivering from the cold and the effort he was experiencing. He was seeing personally the misuse of power that he had heard about so many times in council sessions. The night was going to take an unexpected turn, and tomorrow wouldn't be the same. 28, 29, 30. Marcus counted the last push-ups, his arms quivering from the cold and the exertion. These adjustments would bring about changes that neither Officer Brady nor Thompson could have imagined. The snow and slush had caused his navy suit, which had been previously stain-free, to become completely wet through. Additionally, little bits of gravel had driven into his hands, causing painful indentations. The officer moved past him, boots intentionally dumping nasty snow near Marcus's face, which was not bad for a fine lad, he teased, while Officer Thompson kept shooting on his phone and snickering at his partner's words as he did so. Something slid from Marcus's breast pocket, and his leather wallet struck the wet pavement with a faint thud. As it landed, the wallet flipped open, and the gold city council seal caught the streetlight. Marcus began to lift himself up from the frozen ground. Brady Thompson's voice abruptly lost its sarcastic tone, and he dropped his phone and moved closer to the wallet, shining his torch on the wallet. The wallet was shining bright enough to attract the notice of Officer Thompson. Brady halted his pacing and glanced down his face, which had been filled with arrogance but had lost its color as he read the identification card. "You may be interested in seeing this. Marcus Chen, a member of the City Council and the chairman of the Police Oversight Committee, said that the officer's behavior changed abruptly and dramatically." Brady swiftly went down in an attempt to assist Marcus in standing up. "I am very sorry for the inconvenience. We were sorry, but we had no clue who you were. Please allow me to assist you." Marcus cautiously rose up on his own, his legs rigid from the cold, his suit damaged, and there were damp spots on the He leaned down and picked up his wallet from the rough pavement, racing off the snow with purposeful serenity. Officer Thompson Marcus remarked, softly staring at him. His knees and elbows were tied, and they were pouring with filthy slush. There were tiny holes in the cloth. The younger officer, who is now desperately attempting to erase the video from his phone, "I would not delete that if I were you. Deleting evidence is a severe offense." Thompson's palm froze over his mouth as he tried to delete the footage. The snow continued to fall around them, but the atmosphere had entirely altered, the power dynamic had transformed, and everyone was in a state of uncomfortable stillness. Both cops remained in uncomfortable silence while Marcus wiped off his suit as best he could. This was simply a typical traffic stop that went a little out of hand, and we meant no harm in any way, shape or form. Please realize that Brady began his voice now practically in this. No disrespect intended. Marcus turned to face him, his countenance placid, but his eyes focused. It was a regular traffic check for a tail light that wasn't truly broken, and both of your body cameras were conveniently switched off. The policemen exchanged uncomfortable looks with one another. Marcus could see inhabitants in the neighboring buildings still filming everything on their phones, and he had a feeling that these recordings would be all over social media by the time Mr. Chen and Sir Thompson arrived in the morning. In the future, we are able to explain everything. Maybe we could discuss this in a warmer location. There is a coffee shop just around the corner. Nevertheless, Marcus responded with a voice that carried a shiver that was colder than the ice. He went back to his vehicle, his shoes squishing with each step, leaving wet imprints in the snow before getting in. He turned to face the snow. I believe that we have had enough discussion for tonight. The winter air. I believe that we have had enough chat for today. I would like to propose to both officers Brady and Thompson that they prepare full reports regarding this incident. These reports should cover everything that occurred, including the reason why you pulled me over and why your body cameras were turned off, and why you believed it was right to force a civilian do push-ups in frigid conditions during a traffic stop. The policemen stood rigidly knowing that their careers would be ended. Brady opened his mouth to speak again, but Marcus put up his hand. His hand delivers such reports to my office by 9 o'clock in the morning. I am. Tomorrow, he continued. And Officer Thompson, I anticipate that the whole audio and video from your phone that has not been removed will be included. Good night. The warmth of the heater touched his wet clothing as Marcus got into his vehicle and drove away. As he drove away, he watched in his rearview mirror as the two cops stood in the pouring snow, looking like statues beneath the roadway. They had no idea what was going on. Notion that their petty power play would lead to the most significant police reform their community had ever seen tomorrow would be a hectic day at the city council. But tonight, Marcus had experienced something that would impact not only his life, but also the lives of others. Viewpoint, but the future of the whole police department. Often he believed that the most profound lessons came from the most humiliating events. The heater in Marcus's vehicle was blasting at full speed, but he still couldn't stop shaking his damp hair. It was 12:30 in the morning when the clock on his dashboard revealed that his clothing were clinging to his skin in an uncomfortable manner, and his hands were trembling slightly as they held the driving wheel. The sound of Officer Brady's mocking continued to play in his head as he drove through the peaceful neighborhoods, and he couldn't help but think about the events that had transpired in the previous hour. Laughter, the sensation of the frozen pavement on his palms, and the way his tie had dragged through the gritty slush were all etched into his mind. His phone began to beep on the passenger seat, and it was most likely Sarah who was wondering where she was. Although he was, Marcus was unable to get the courage to answer the question. How could he possibly explain to his wife that her husband, a respected member of the city council, had been made to do push-ups in the snow like a recruit at boot camp? Marcus found himself in the middle of the situation. When he peered in the rearview mirror, his normally immaculate black hair was damp and unkempt, and his face seemed to be older than its 45 years. Small bits of gravel were still adhered to his suit sleeves, and he had a smattering of loose gravel on his face. He remarked to himself, "You just had to experience it firsthand, don't you?" For years he had sat through innumerable situations, and he had a dark, wet patch stretched over his chest where snow and soap had accumulated. At community meetings when individuals had voiced their dissatisfaction with police harassment, he had listened, made notes, and pledged to investigate their cases. Nevertheless, up until now, he had never completely understood the helplessness that they were experiencing. His phone chimed. Again, this time there was a news notice that someone had already published a video of the event to social media. Marcus watched the video for a few seconds, and the shaky film showed him doing push-ups as the cops chuckled. The video was gaining popularity. Views by the minute as Marcus turned down his street, he saw that his hands had stopped trembling. The first shock and embarrassment were being replaced by something else. Then, in his 15 years on the city council, he observed that his hands had stopped shaking. When he drove into his driveway, he did not immediately get out of it. Instead, he grabbed for his briefcase and took out his tablet, opened his email, and started composing an emergency meeting notice. He had never been more confident about what needed to be done. The timing for the Police Oversight Committee is 9:30 in the morning. I am. There will be a review of recent police behavior and departmental policy as part of the agenda for tomorrow's meeting in the main council chamber. Attendance is required, and after sending the email, Marcus began making calls, first to his assistant Mary, who answered despite the late hour. Mary, I need every single one of you. I received a complaint that had been made against policemen Brady and Thompson from the last 5 years around 8 o'clock in the morning. I am. I would also appreciate it if you could provide me with the body camera compliance reports for the previous 6 months that Mary has utilized. To urgent demands, did not ask any questions, yes sir, anything else yes. Marcus said that he was watching snow continuing to fall in his driveway. Contacted. I want all of the films starting at 11:45 p.m. from the traffic cameras located at the intersection of Pine Street and 5th Street to approximately 12:30 a.m. I am. Thank you very much, Mary. And tonight, Marcus finally phoned the one person he knew would get the enormity of what had occurred, and that was his father, who had retired. According to Police Captain James Chen, the phone rang 3 times before his father's voice, which was still clear despite the fact that he was 70 years old, answered. His father Marcus remarked, his voice slightly breaking, "Recall all those times. When you taught me about the ways in which power may corrupt excellent officers, I just experienced it." As Marcus narrated what had occurred, his father listened calmly. When Marcus finished, the old captain remained silent for a considerable amount of time. Marcus stared at his torn suit before speaking to his kid. Sometimes the most difficult experiences are the greatest fuel for change. What are you going to do about it? Marcus looked at his ruined suit, but then at his son. I'm going to do what should have been done years ago, Dad, and tomorrow we will start cleaning the home. Marcus eventually stepped out of his vehicle and went out of the parking lot. His council badge was resting on the passenger seat. In the direction of his front door, the home was black, with the exception of the porch light that Sarah usually kept on for him, despite the fact that tomorrow would bring a storm to the police station. However, tonight he wanted to embrace his wife in order to warm her up and be ready for the imminent conflict. Wet footprints that he left on his front porch would be gone by the time morning arrived, but the influence of this night would continue to have a far longer-lasting effect at precisely 7 o'clock in the morning. I am. When Marcus arrived at City Hall, he seemed to be a different person from the one who had previously. Just a few hours before, Marcus had performed push-ups in the snow. He was dressed in his most dapper black suit, wearing his lucky red tie, and had a heavy folder under his arm. The security guard at the entry took a second take since Marcus was seldom seen in this early. His assistant Mary was also surprised. was already at her desk, and there were heavy bags under her eyes, which indicated that she had worked through the night. There were 5 piles of documents neatly placed on her desk, along with a huge coffee cup. "Good morning, Mr. Standing Up," Chen replied. "I have everything you asked for." Officers Brady and Thompson have been the subject of 17 complaints over the course of the previous 5 years, but none of them have been properly investigated. Presented him with the first stack of papers, Marcus nodded and took the documents, and according to the video from the body camera, Mary picked up another stack of papers that seemed fascinating. Once there, both cops reported that their cameras had malfunctioned 12 times in the past 6 months, which is 4 times the average for the department. The office began to come alive as more staff members arrived, and many of them gave Marcus inquisitive looks. The video from the previous evening had gone viral. It had already had more than 100,000 views, and local news stations were playing it on their morning programs. Marcus's phone had been ringing non-stop ever since he made his morning coffee. At 8:45 in the morning, the police chief had phoned as many as 6 times, the mayor twice, and reporters from every local news outlet had requested remarks. Nevertheless, he had ignored all of them. I am. Both Brady and Thompson, the cop, came. At his office they seemed different in the daylight. They were smaller and somehow less intimidating. Brady's customary self-assurance was replaced by nervous fidgeting, and Thompson was unable to meet Marcus's eyes. Marcus asked, simply holding up his reports. Out of his hand, the cops gave over their papers. Their hands were trembling slightly, which was a significant change from the previous night when they had been so brave in the cold. Sir Brady began talking about the previous night's mark, had interrupted him with a raised hand, and suggested that he keep it for the committee meeting that will take place in 45 minutes. I advise that you both go prepare. Once they have gone, Marcus studied their reports as predicted. Both cops attempted to, in an effort to minimize the severity of the event. Brady said that he was carrying out a regular field sobriety test, while Thompson stated that Marcus had volunteered to do the exercises at 9:25 in the morning. I am. It was Marcus who entered. The main council chamber, the room was full with all of the committee members, as well as scores of civilians who had heard about the emergency meeting. Local news cameras lined the rear wall. The president of the police department sat in the middle of the room. His expression seemed to be either angry or embarrassed, and it was possible that both policemen Brady and Thompson, who were seated close and were now dressed in full uniforms, appeared to be uncomfortable. Marcus took his position in the front row. Agree in the middle of the committee table. He set the papers in front of him. These included the reports of the complaints, the recordings from the body camera, the video from the traffic camera from the previous night, and the officers' fake reports. Before we started, Marcus stated into the microphone, I would want to express my gratitude to cops Brady and Thompson. His speech was calm but forceful. The room became hushed in uncertainty. The 2 cops glanced up, shocked. Last night, these officers were surprised. Marcus said they didn't know they were dealing with a city council member. They thought I was just another citizen they could humiliate, and that's exactly the reason why we need major police reform in our city. This is exactly why we need to reform our police force. Difficulty. He touched a button, and the enormous screen that was behind him came to life. The film from the traffic camera began playing, and it showed the whole event that occurred the night before from a variety of perspectives. The room watched in surprise. Marcus replied, his voice getting louder, that we are not only going to speak about 2 policemen who misused their position. We are going to talk about every officer who believes that a badge gives them the right to do anything they want, them the authority to humiliate citizens. We are going to investigate every complaint that was disregarded, every body camera that inexplicably malfunctioned, and every fake report that was made, with a particular focus on officers Brady and Thompson. Marcus added, And we are going to begin with the previous evening when the room was totally still. Now every eye is locked on Marcus, and the following few hours will transform the city's police department forever, and everyone in the room could sense it. The meeting was about to begin. Justice was about to be served, and Marcus took up the first file that was sitting on his desk. His actions were slow and calm, and the room remained still. The tension in the room was as heavy as the tension that had been there the night before. Snowflakes, the local news cameras murmured gently in the background, filming every minute. Let's begin with Officer Brady's report. Marcus spoke, his voice clearly over the microphone, according to this, in accordance with this. You pulled me over for a regular traffic check, and there was a suspicion that I was under the influence of alcohol. Is that correct? Officer Brady squirmed uneasily in his chair. His clothing became uncomfortable. Marcus nodded and hit another button as the giant screen behind him displayed the traffic camera video from the previous day. The uniform suddenly seemed to be too tight around his neck. Yes, sir. That was my professional judgment at the time. The picture was crystal clear, and it showed Marcus's automobile traveling exactly inside his lane while adhering to all of the traffic laws. Marcus noted that it was intriguing, since the traffic camera reveals that he was driving absolutely normally, without veering. He turned to face Brady straight and said, "Would you like to revise your statement?" Before Brady could respond, Marcus brought out another paper, and there was Officer Thompson in your possession. He was speeding and there was no broken taillight. Reports that you indicate that I volunteered to conduct exercises in the snow are that your official statement. Thompson's face had went pale. The young officer glanced to his superior, Chief Williams, who sat red-faced in the front row, then back at the young officer. Marcus. I may have misremembered certain facts. A murmur spread through the audience. Marcus showed the video from a bystander's phone, showing Brady, instructing him to perform push-ups, while Thompson filmed and displayed the footage. As they laughed, the room was filled with the sound of their mocking laughter. Misrecalled, Marcus reiterated in a low voice, "You misremembered to turn on your body cameras, just as you misremembered to follow proper traffic stop procedures, Mary." Marcus stepped in and gave him another file. He opened it and addressed the whole group. Over the course of the previous 5 years, these 2 officers have been the subject of 17 civilian complaints. The chief requests information about the number of complaints that have been thoroughly investigated. Williams stood up, his face now purple. Mr. Chen, with all due respect, this appears like a personal vendetta because of one unlucky incident, Marcus. With his voice, which was still calm but had an edge that hushed the chief Letton, he turned to the gathering and asked how many individuals here have received similar treatment from our organization. The hands of the residents of the police department gradually started to rise, first a few, and then more, until about half of the people in the room had their hands up. The television cameras moved across the gathering, filming every hand that was raised. Symbolizes a tale that Marcus persisted in telling about humiliation, misuse of power and fear, stories that were ignored or disregarded up until this point, when he finally decided to pull out. This is yet another paper that has a plan for quick reform of the police force. It includes the obligatory use of body cameras, as well as strong sanctions for non-compliance, civilian monitoring of all complaint investigations, and instant suspension. Brady and Thompson sat with their backs slouched in their seats, their previous swagger entirely gone. Chief Williams had stopped attempting to defend them and was gazing at his shoes. Brady and Thompson were the policemen who were discovered to be misusing their authority. There are two options available to you, according to Thompson Marcus. You may resign immediately, or we can continue our inquiry, which will involve analyzing every complaint that has been lodged against you and every traffic stop that you have made. Brady, who seemed to be so strong the night before in the snow, suddenly appeared to be little and defeated. Thompson was obviously sweating despite the fact that the room was chilly. Every report that you completed would cause the room to hold its breath. Temperature will quit, Brady stated in a low voice, his voice barely reaching the microphone. Marcus nodded. The decision was a sensible one, and he turned to Chief Williams. Chief, the chief bowed his head firmly, aware that his own career was now on the line. Marcus picked up the Police Reform Proposal Committee. The department has to be cleaned up, and either you can lead that transformation or we can find someone who will. It is time for the vote, members. And last night demonstrated to us what takes on in our city when we are hiding in the shadows. Today, we bring everything into the light. And one by one, the committee members raised their hands in favor of the motion. The vote was unanimous, and Marcus was the one who cast the vote. While he was gathering his paperwork, he caught sight of his father sitting calmly in the back of the room. The elderly police captain gave his son a modest, proud nod. Sometimes justice required a push, or in this instance 30. As the news of Officers Brady and Thompson's resignation spread around the city like wildfire, push-ups were performed in the snow to finally be served. By late afternoon, every local television station was broadcasting the news. Marcus sat in his office watching the coverage on a little television while replying to hundreds of letters from individuals from all around the world. The article included snippets from the committee meeting, in addition to the video that went viral of Marcus doing push-ups in the snow. His email was swamped with messages of support, new complaints against other cops, and thank you cards from locals who finally felt heard. Mr. Chen Mary phoned him. All of the citizens in the city were sharing their own tales of police harassment. From the entryway, the mayor is here to see you. Mayor Roberts strode in with a look of exhaustion and concern, which was a departure from his typical confident stride. He moved slowly. As if someone were approaching a sleeping lion, Marcus said, "Yes, we do need to talk about what happened today." Marcus responded by turning off the television, but before he did so, he opened his laptop and showed you something. I presented the mayor with a spreadsheet that includes all of the complaints that have been lodged by civilians against our police department in the approximately 300 incidents were reported to the mayor in the previous year. But just 8 were thoroughly examined. When he slumped into a chair and began to untie his tie, I had no notion that nobody else was doing this. Marcus said that he rose up and moved to the window, where he looked down at the swarm of people. He did this since nobody wanted to look at him. Despite the fact that reporters are still congregated outside of City Hall, everyone is now looking his way. He had been getting calls from his father, who was a retired police captain, throughout the whole day. His phone buzzed with another message from his father, former co-workers, some of whom were upset, others of whom were sympathetic, including the nice police who thanked him for his father's message. They had been looking for a change for years, but they were stopped by a tap on the door. It was Sarah Marcus's wife, carrying a clean suit inside. While he was pleased of what he was achieving, she had been his rock throughout all of this. However, she was concerned about the response that he might get. After putting the suit down, she gently reminded him that the press conference was in an hour. She then held his hand and said, "You're going to be there." Marcus, certain that he was doing the right thing, changed into the new suit as the mayor paced uncomfortably. The police union is. Marcus responded by changing his actions while vowing to fight back against Mayor Robert, who said that people are alleging you are on a witch hunt. In this case, we have proof, we have witnesses, and most importantly, we have the truth. It is time for real change to take place. Following that, Mary hurried in with the shocking news that 2 other cops from another precinct had quit after locals aired their concerns. Around 5 o'clock, films of abuses of a similar kind were being circulated by the movement. I Am. A Marcus camera flashes lit up the early evening as the individual stepped out to confront the gathering of reporters that had gathered on the steps of the municipal hall. In every direction, he was confronted by darkness that resembled lightning microphones at the same time. When Marcus started his voice last night, it was powerful and clear, and I experienced what many of our the residents have been dealing with this issue for years. But unlike many of them, I have the ability to take action now that will transform the situation. The new police reform bill, which has been drafted and adopted in record speed, was shown as a large document. This is only the beginning of the process. At the outset, we are going to form a new civilian oversight body that will have actual authority. There will be an investigation into each and every allegation, and each and every officer will be held responsible for their actions. The ERS yelled questions, but Marcus lifted his hand in a gesture of silence to the honorable police officers that serve our community. If you are one of those cops, we are here to support you. Among the throng, he saw Officer Thompson's wife softly weeping. Marcus, who abuses their authority, your time has come to an end. He had a brief moment of compassion, but he recalled the innumerable instances in which acts had repercussions, and families often suffered the price. For families that had endured hardships as a result of police misbehavior, change is not a simple task. He went on to say that it is essential, and that beginning tomorrow, we will start training our employees. It will be required to use force and de-escalation tactics, and body cams will be examined on a daily basis. Community interaction will be promoted. As soon as he finished speaking, someone in the audience began clapping, and the applause continued until it reached its point of maximum intensity. Marcus heard his father's voice reverberating off the walls of the city hall in the rear, and he saw his father standing tall and proud, just like he used to stand. He was wearing the uniform of a police captain as the sun was sinking behind the city skyscrapers, causing long shadows on the stairs. Yet he was still able to, the shadows of this night, in contrast to the shadows of the previous night, were not concealing abuses of power. Rather, they were signaling the end of an age. Tomorrow, the beginning of a new one, would bring with it other obstacles, more opposition, and additional labor. But tonight there is no such thing. As Marcus Chen stood on those stairs, he was aware of the fact that sometimes the most difficult events might lead to the most positive changes 6 months later. Marcus Chen had been compelled to do push-ups in the snow that the city had on that chilly winter night. A lot of time had gone since then. On a sunny summer morning, Marcus stood at the podium at the police station. He had changed in ways that even he had not anticipated. The graduating hall of the academy before him on Saturday, 50 new police officers who had been trained under the behind them. Chairs were filled with proud families, and among them were former commanders. He had been instrumental in the creation of the new system. The 2 former policemen, Brady and Thompson, had not vanished following their departure from the force. Rather than making a resignation, something unexpected had occurred 3 months earlier, and Brady had come out to Marcus with an unexpected request. He wanted to assist in training new police on what they should not do. Thompson had joined him, and the 2 of them now presented their tale as a compelling lesson on the misuse of power. Take a look at the guy. Marcus, who was seated next to you, started his statement by saying that the individual in question is not simply your fellow officer, they are also your conscience. Serve as a witness and a reminder of what it takes to be a good police officer to the newly graduated class in comparison to past years. There were a greater number of women and members of minority groups, and each and every one of them had been through something. They had worked in homeless shelters, youth centers, and other charitable organizations as part of their training, which included considerable community service. 6 months ago, before I had ever touched a badge, I stood in the snow in front of many elderly homes. Having been embarrassed by cops who had forgotten their genuine mission, Marcus finished his statement. At this moment I am filled with pride to see cops who are aware that a badge is not a weapon, but rather a sign of trust in the community. Chief Williams, who was sitting in the front row, nodded and acknowledged that he had shocked everyone by accepting the changes after first resisting them. Became one of their most ardent advocates, and as a result, they fired 12 cops for wrongdoing and promoted others who had been promoted. Exhibited genuine leadership in the community, Mary Marcus's assistant approached and gave over the check. Marcus found some papers, and they were the most recent data that had just come off the printer. Grinned as he read them to the gathering. In the last 6 months, there has been a reduction of 70% in the number of civilian complaints. Community trust in reaction times have improved, and most crucially, both people and law enforcement have seen a 65% rise in their number. Brady moved in his seat, his expression exhibiting a mixture of shame and optimism from his teenage son, according to the police, who reported feeling safer. Sat next to him and watched the newly appointed officers with admiration. Thompson's wife, who had shed tears at the press conference a few months earlier, she was smiling and laying her hand on her husband's shoulder. But Marcus remarked that the most significant difference was that she was now smiling. Is not in these figures. Rather, it is in the tales that I no longer hear about fear and humiliation on a regular basis. With the misuse of authority, I instead hear fresh accounts of cops assisting senior citizens, residents with groceries, playing hoops with children from the neighborhood, and doing genuine community service. Marcus's father sat in the middle of the room. He had been helpful in the creation of the new uniform, which he wore on the back while wearing his old police captain's outfit. Training curriculum that will share with you as you get your certification. 40 years of experience on what it means to be a successful police officer today. Keeping in mind that power is not defined by the number of push-ups you can force someone to do or how many you can make them do, Marcus proceeded. True power is derived from the number of lives that can be improved, the number of people that you can assist, and the amount of terror that you can inspire. How much trust you are able to develop. The ceremony came to a close with something new. Each officer took an oath, not merely to, when they were receiving their badges, they were required to not just enforce the law, but also serve the community with respect, decency, and compassion. Following the ceremony, each of them was assigned a civilian advisor who would work with them for the first year following the ceremony. Marcus Mr. Chen approached Brady, and as he looked down at his feet, he murmured, "I never thought I would. I have apologized in a suitable manner for what I did and what we did that night. It was inappropriate. Thank you." Marcus shook his hand, sometimes congratulated him on making it into something worthy of praise. As Marcus stepped out of the academy building, he spotted 2 of the new students. The greatest errors sometimes lead to the best improvements. On another corner, cops were assisting an old lady in crossing the street with her groceries. An officer was offering support for the woman, the children in the neighborhood, how to use the radio in the police vehicles. His phone rang, and he received a call from another city that wanted to learn about that evening. The reform program, the changes that they had made, were spreading, generating waves that were well beyond the boundaries of their municipal boundaries. As Marcus drove by the location where he had performed push-ups 6 months earlier, the snow had transformed into summer stars. One of the new community outside, the windows of the police center were warm and inviting, while inside, police and people sat together. The building was still standing. Marcus occasionally believed that 30 push-ups in the snow would be a good idea, not just as subjects and powers, but also as collaborators in making their city better. To bring about a change in the world, or at the very least, begin the process. Thanks for watching. Do not forget to subscribe this channel.